Hi, everyone. I'm Gary Summers, and welcome to the audio edition of Mind, Body, Soul, a show about your mental, physical, and spiritual wellness. I have with me a very special guest, Michelle Lee, who is the owner of Bodhi Hot Yoga. And this is the first of two interviews we're going to do with Michelle. It wasn't always this way with her, but just let me introduce Michelle, and we can get into this interview right away. Hello, Michelle Lee.
Hello, Gary. I'm so excited to be talking with you today. It's always a pleasure. Like I said, you have such a great platform and you utilize it so well. So I'm happy to be here today.
Thank you, Michelle. And I know you're busy, and when I follow you and I see all your classes and the things that you're doing, and I sometimes when I see you, I always think I never see Michelle Lee upset. I mean, she must be upset at some points, but I never see her. She always has a smile on her face. So you must be doing something, obviously, to put a smile on your face, because life just doesn't work that way. You have to do something. So just before we really get into backing up as to where this all began, just tell our listeners a little bit about what you do.
Well, you said it too. I'm the owner and operator of Bodhi Hot Yoga on Kinmount Road. And I started that just over 3 years ago with a big mission, just like yourself, to improve mental health in our community. And I really feel like yoga is a gateway to the highest version of yourself. And it can be used not only through poses to strengthen and get flexible, but to really tap into inside and start listening to inside, to what you need physically and emotionally.
And you mentioned to become the highest or the best version of yourself, and that's so important because I did an interview a while ago, and we talked about the perfection trap and the comparison trap, and always looking outward and seeing how you can compete with your neighbors or your friends or things, and when it really comes down to it, it's really not about a competition. It's about what you just said, becoming the best version of yourself, isn't it?
Well, when you go step onto your yoga mat, you don't have your phone. You don't have the outside world. You roll out this little space that's 2 by 6 and you lie down there and you let it all go. You realize after 60 minutes that you don't need anything to be happy. All you needed was that space that you've created on your mat. You use those poses to create more happiness, to create a better version of yourself. It's crazy what yoga can do if you practice it long enough. Many people come through my doors for the physical aspect, right?
Yeah.
They're not, or the emotional aspect. They want to relieve stress or anxiety, whatever it be, the reason you stepped onto your mat. But if you practice it long enough, you start to discover the true reason that people do yoga. You start to uncover what it really truly means.
And I
Right?
remember I always hear you saying you leave with one and come back with three.
Yes. Yeah.
Great.
You just
Great.
got to stick to it. It's about diligence.
Yeah.
It's about
So
diligence.
so I don't want you to give up away too much, because just for our listeners, we did Michelle's interview about Bodhi Hot Yoga first. She was a bit reluctant to come on and talk about her story, but she finally decided that her story needed to be heard, because I'm sure there could be people who are going through the same situation as Michelle went through. So just as a brief as a brief introduction to the people, because they're gonna get a full idea in this. So just very briefly, because you know how you really got into your career with the tree and all that stuff. So, but just
Hell
a
yeah.
brief, yeah. So just a brief, just tell them how you got started in this.
So in 2015, it was just before Christmas of 2015, and I finally was convinced to go on to my yoga mat. It took a little convincing, but after I lay there for 60 minutes and this light bulb just went off in my head, I was like, oh my gosh. I sat there and I was all sweaty and the lights were very dim and the music was very soft and tears were just kind of rolling down my face. And I felt this beautiful feeling of bliss. And I said, wow, like that is the best thing that I've ever done. And up to that point, I had spiritually been reading so many books and was trying to grow spiritually, to get to where I wanted to be in my life. I knew, I had to kind of focus on a spiritual aspect in my life. And once it met yoga, it was just like, oh, so I had a light bulb go off, and I said, this is your path. I'm just going to do yoga for the rest of my life. And 6 months later, I quit my job and took off on a plane to Tampa and did a 500-hour training in Bikram yoga, and came back with a fire lit within me. And I started to teach, sometimes to no one, but one person. That might have even been my mother. Two people might show up. And then finally I bursted out of this little hole in the wall and started to grow my business, what you see it today. But it was all from that little space on my mat that it all began. But the journey getting there was quite different from that moment of bliss, because it wasn't always bliss.
So not only, I just want our listeners to understand that not only do I want you to listen to the words that Michelle is saying, but the passion and excitement in her voice is what's even more addictive when you sit down and talk with her. I've never done a yoga class, but you're getting me convinced. So
if we can last the pandemic, you can come see me.
Yeah. So life is good for you, and I can see that you can see it in your face, but it wasn't always this way, was it? Can you tell us about your struggle with anxiety? Was it yoga that helped to overcome it? And in other words, tell us a little bit about your story before that first yoga class, before you didn't feel like you wanted to do anything. What explained it? Because I'm sure there's got to be, especially with the pandemic, how many people are going through something similar to what you're going through? And I always say to people, this is not rocket science. If one person can do it, everybody can do it. So
absolutely,
go ahead, tell your story.
So you wouldn't believe it, but a year before I went off for training, I was confined to my home. I had ignored all of the red flags telling me that I needed help with anxiety, that I couldn't do it on my own. And I was confined to my home. It had gotten so bad that I couldn't leave my own house.
Michelle, just explain to the listeners, what were the red flags? Can you remember some of the red flags?
The not being able to get rid of the anxiety. So even I didn't drink, I didn't smoke, I didn't do drugs, I ate healthy, I exercised, and I still had anxiety. And my red flags were just this debilitating. I mean, I was the walking dead. I wasn't functioning. I was the walking dead in society. And looking back, I always thought, okay, just get through the day, and then tomorrow, if you feel better, you'll be able to do it. You'll be fine. But tomorrow never was better. It was always this constant struggle, and we're not meant to struggle. And yeah, so it was a really hard time for me. It compounded from my early 20s. First, in 20s, you're out drinking, you're in the bars, you're in the scene, and you're having fun, and everybody around you is doing the same thing. And, I always used to think I was hungover, and I didn't understand why my friends could drink the same amount and I would drink the same amount, but I would be crippled the next day. I would have so much anxiety. I didn't realize it was anxiety. I thought it was a hangover. So when I stopped drinking, I realized, oh my God, I'm not hungover. I'm anxious, right? I have anxiety. So I didn't even realize it was anxiety because there was so much other things clouding it. I would smoke weed, and that after I would smoke a joint, then my anxiety would subside. I would have a beer or two, and then my anxiety would subside. I just thought, you worked all day. I was in sales. So I worked 60 hours in car sales, and that's a high energy job. And I just figured, I'm bed out from all day. A couple of beer will calm me down.
Yeah,
but
sure,
I was anxious, and I just didn't realize it. So it compounded through my 20s. And then in my 30s, it was getting really bad, to the point where, like I said, I didn't end up leaving my house for a full year. I mean, I was in a sales job and was required to drive to Carbonear and Bay Roberts twice a week.
Hmm.
And you go out the Trans Canada and you would get to that turn to go down to Bay Roberts. And I would push myself so much to get to that turn. I would be dizzy. My hands would be sweating. I felt like I couldn't breathe. My heart would pound. I would feel like someone was choking me. And I would push myself to that turn. And oftentimes, probably 8 out of 10 times, I would get to that turn and turn around and go back because I couldn't physically do it. And I would go home after being so mentally and physically exhausted from the anxiety. I would go to bed in the middle of the day and I wasn't doing my job.
Were
And
you, what message were you giving yourself? Were you saying to yourself, I can't do this?
in the moment when I would turn around,
Yes.
I would be so dizzy I couldn't see straight. I knew that I couldn't deal with public. I would have to go in and do sales, and I couldn't do that. I knew I couldn't do it. I was a mess. I was a complete mess. If I did go, it would be very hard on me. I would push through it. The anxiety would increase throughout the day, and then I would go home and I would just sleep because you're just so physically exhausted, right?
So was this, did this anxiety gradually overtake you, or was it one morning you woke up with a different feeling and you didn't like that feeling? Like what was the beginning of it?
In the 20s when you're drinking and partying, you're not knowing that you have anxiety because it's being covered, right? You're just going through the motions as a young 20-year-old. You're doing what everybody's doing. You're going to school, you're trying to get a job after school. So I was just being compounded. I was always anxious, but I didn't realize it. So it was being compounded year after year after year until it really started to physically attack me, and to the point where I was debilitated. I could not function in society. I couldn't do my job. I couldn't drive. Fear, anxiety takes over, so that and then you fear everything. There's this illogical fear that you can't even explain. You can't do things like drive. I couldn't drive to the mall to meet my mother and my sister-in-law to go see a movie, because by the time I left my house, I was getting further away from my safe spot, right? So as I was driving away, my anxiety was rising and rising and rising to the point where I turned around and went back.
So
So
here's what happens. Your subconscious mind is basically your friend. It wants to protect you, but it doesn't have critical thinking. It doesn't tell you what's right or from wrong. It just listens to, it downloads whatever you are saying or thinking in your mind, and what happens is it expands. So for instance, if you have a fear of flying, and so you get on a plane and you elicit this anxiety and fear, and your subconscious mind says, okay, Michelle doesn't like flying. I'm just using you as an example. So I'll make sure it's not a problem. So I'll make sure she has a fear of flying. Now you get in your car and you start to drive and you exhibit that same anxiety and fear. Your subconscious mind says, hold on, now Michelle is experiencing this now. Your subconscious mind doesn't know the difference between flying and driving. It just knows it's a fear, it's an anxiety. So it says, okay, I'll make sure Michelle gets afraid of driving a car. Then I'll make sure she gets afraid of, because when she leaves her house, she has the same symptoms. I'll make sure she's so afraid to leave her house, I'll just build a box around her. And after a while, some people just can't get out of bed. So that's why it's so important to be able to recognize that when anxiety starts, you have to do something about it, because it only gets worse. Michelle, was it heredity for you, or was it somebody said something to you, or something happened to you that just all of a sudden it created this anxiety for you? It just happened, did it? Just high pressure?
I think it's definitely hereditary. My mom's side all have really high anxiety. My aunt is in her house now. She's 70 something years old and she can't leave her home. That's not my story to tell, but she's suffering, right?
Yeah.
there's no need to suffer is what I know. And yeah, I think it's more hereditary. And I think putting myself in high pressure situations did not help it. I don't think drinking in my 20s helped it. I think it was just compounding year after year after year, but definitely hereditary, I think, for me. There was
The
no big moment. There was no, I didn't have trauma. I had a good childhood. You know what I mean? I had things that I played sports. I had friends. I had a pretty normal life. So there's nothing that really sticks out for me to have high anxiety.
the greatest fear that we all have is failure and rejection.
Mhm.
That's the greatest fear that you humans have. So sometimes we create that anxiety because we just have such a fear of, well, what about if I have to do this presentation and I forget something, or they don't like me,
Mm.
or something happens that is not exactly what they were looking for. So yeah, so I'm sorry, so continue on.
So it was getting bad. These are just examples of
Sure.
when it was getting really bad. I remember this friend of mine who was going through all of this with me. Where I couldn't leave my house, she would always come to me, but I never told her that the anxiety was as bad. It wasn't very vocal. It was just, why don't we come to my house and do this? And she would always be compliant. You know what I mean? Let's come to my house and cook dinner. Let's come to my house and go up in the woods and go for a hike. So I
It,
always had people come to me for me to be safe and for me to get through the day, right?
and
I
also, the stigma of mental health, obviously it's getting better, but sometimes you kind of want to keep that to yourself, which doesn't help either.
Yes, and it's not even I don't even think I realized it.
Yeah, yeah.
It wasn't really until I cracked wide open. But I do remember her one particular day she wanted me to meet her at the grocery store so we could pick up our groceries and cook dinner. And I showed up at the grocery store and she looked at me and she said, "Michelle, you're in your pajamas." I said, "Yeah, I know." And I kind of pushed the cart and she said, "No, you're in your pajamas." And this was in the middle of the day. And it makes me want to cry because I couldn't even get dressed. It was too much.
Well,
It was,
Michelle, you're getting emotional because this is bringing you back to a really low point in your life, right?
yes, yes. I couldn't even get dressed. It took too much energy and it would affect me so much that I just never even got dressed. I put on fuzzy boots. I had pink flannel pajamas on with the collar of my flannel pajamas sticking out of my sweater. And that's how I went to the store. So it dilutes your reality. That's what it starts to do is you start to see a different reality that does not exist because fear takes over and it's not your natural state of being, right?
Michelle,
It's
what was the turning point? What was the low point?
Yeah.
What made you decide that I've had enough?
Yes. So the day before I went to the hospital, I was going to dinner with that same friend. I was having a really, really, really bad day. It was about 25 degrees out. It was beautiful. And she says, "Come on, let's just go to the keg. We'll go up on the deck. We'll have a nice dinner and you'll be fine. You'll breathe in the fresh air." So she convinced me to do it. I struggled and got ready. And we were into the new keg now. So it wasn't the old one, it was the new one. And if you've ever been in it, it's dark and the stairs are long to go upstairs to get
Mm-hmm.
outside. And I parked just by the keg. You could almost see my car. And I remember walking up the stairs and it was like tunnel vision started to come in. And I stopped dead on the stairs and I said to the waitress, I said, can we sit downstairs?" Leslie said, "No, why don't we?" I said, "No, I can't." And she just knew what I meant.
Yeah.
And I asked to sit in front of the window where I could see my car because that was my safe haven. I knew if I had to leave, my car was right there. And I opened up the menu and I started to look at the menu and everything was dizzy and my heart was pounding. And I just remember looking at her and I started to cry. And I said, "I can't do it. I can't do this. I have to go. I have to leave." And I remember she just got up and she got up and she left with me. And on the walk out to my car, she said, "You got to go to the doctor." And I said, "I know." And the next day I went to see my family doctor.
And how long after that? So it took a year after that to get on the yoga mat.
Well, it was so when she took one look at me, and this is important too. um, my family doctor took one look at me and said, "Is your mother out there?" And I said, "Yes." And she called my mom into the doctor's office with us, and they kind of talked about me as if I wasn't even there. It was kind of like slow motion.
Mm.
And she said, "You got to take her to the Waterford now." And I objected. I said, "There's no way I'm going to the Waterford. You're going to lock me up. Like, I'm not,
Mm.
I'm not crazy. I'm not going to the," and they said, "No, it's just the quickest route for you to get help. It's going to be the shortest wait time for you to see somebody. And, you can
Yeah.
go to the other hospital," she said. And she looked at me, she's like, "You've known me for 30 years. I'm not going to send you into a hospital where you can't get out.
Right.
So I'm just trying to help you." Right. But
Yeah.
that's anxiety playing on your mind
Sure.
with irrational fear.
Yeah.
So I remember my mom took me and we were driving to the Waterford. And I remember driving up in the parking lot and asking her, "Mom, you're not leaving me here, are you?" And she said, "Michelle, I'm not going to leave you here." And I agreed to go in, and I was sent into triage, and they asked me all kinds of questions. "Are you suicidal? Are you on drugs? Did you take any drugs today? Do you have any drugs on you?" All these questions. And then they sent me back in the waiting room. And after a couple of hours of waiting, out I go into this room with the doctor. And he looks at me, he reads the kind of page for a minute, and he says, "You've got anxiety, do you?" I said, "Yes." And he went like this and wrote on a little piece of paper 50 milligrams of Zoloft and a thing of Ativan and sent me out the door.
Quick solution.
Right. And that's what's wrong. That's what's
Yeah.
wrong. And that's what I'm hoping we're going to be able to change.
Yes.
Because I needed to speak to someone, and I had asked to speak to somebody about my anxiety. And he said that there is this program, I can't remember the name of it, this program, and they will reach out to you and you will get to speak to a psychiatrist. And luckily that my dad has connections, that the very next day I got to speak to somebody, and she ripped up my Zoloft prescription. She put me on 10 milligrams, 5 milligrams of Cipralex, and changed my Ativan to another prescription, and sent me on my way after speaking to me for an hour. I spoke with her a couple of times a week until she said to me finally, "Michelle, you're in a better place than I am." She's like, "There's nothing wrong with you." And I remember fighting her to take the pills, and she said, if you had high blood pressure, you would take the pill, right? She's like, "I can't tell you to exercise. I can't tell you not to drink or to eat well. You're doing all the things that you need to do, but you have anxiety, so you need to take the pill." And once I started to take the pill, the feelings of being choked were gone. The feelings of not being able to breathe through my nose were gone. The dizziness was gone. The sweating was gone. All these symptoms that were crippling me were gone. And I was just left with myself. Yes, go ahead.
So I think for people to understand, and I don't think anybody is against medications. I think they certainly have a rightful place. But what happens is we become dependent and reliant on our medications. And when we continue to do that, we never step outside and do something to make ourselves feel better. So, when a doctor prescribes a medication, I think it's meant until you're at the point when you can think clearly yourself, when you can put one foot in front of the other, and then you can say, "I now have control of my life back." And then you can move past the medications, and then you can start to do things yourself to make yourself feel better. That's really, I think, the purpose of all of it.
Absolutely. And I do feel like even if you do all of those things to move you forward and you still have to take that pill, you take that pill.
Absolutely.
Don't live in the struggle. But
Right.
You have to help yourself. You can't rely on medication to fix the world for you. And you have to grab a hold of the world.
Absolutely.
Right? You have to do things for yourself. The yoga, the gym, the eating, whatever it is that makes you feel good. That's what you need to do. You cannot just rely on a prescription to fix your problems. You need to go deep and find out what's causing them, right?
So, and I know we talked about this before, improving community mental health has been a goal of yours, obviously. How does what you do improve your mental health and others? And again, just don't spoil next week's interview, because
I will.
Next week's is even better than this one, because I'm sure people are listening and saying, Michelle Lee doesn't have anxiety. I mean, listen to her.
Yeah,
Listen how she sounds. Well, of course she doesn't have it now.
yeah,
And there's a really good reason why she doesn't have it now. And if you listen next
mhm,
week, you'll probably understand why she doesn't have it now.
yes.
So what does it do? I mean, just very briefly, what you do help yourself and others?
So I didn't open the doors to Bodhi for people to conquer tree pose. I opened the doors to my studio so that you could use those poses as the gateway, like we were saying, as the gateway to the highest version of yourself. I open them to create space in your body and in your mind, right? And like I said, through diligence, through coming to your mat, you're going to find the true reasons why yoga is so powerful and so addictive, right? It calms you, it brings you to stillness. See, we're trying to get into the gap, that little pause
Hmm.
between your thoughts. And the more you do yoga and the more times that you lay in that stillness, you're forced into stillness, right? I always ask people, what was the hardest today of your practice? Was it the poses or was it the stillness? Because people can't be alone with thoughts. That's when their mind starts to race. That's when the hamster runs around the wheel,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
But if you can diligently practice creating a little gap, even if it's for a second, you can just breathe in that space. And then maybe that second next week becomes 3 and then 5. And you've created room now in your body and in your mind. And that becomes so addictive, that little piece. And then you not only can create space on your mat, you start to take it out into the world. You use moments, like, for example, I know that we all do it. The commercial comes on, you pick up your phone and you just start to
Hmm.
scroll, right? But rather than scroll, you take that moment to just breathe, right? So you're now using those skills you're learning on your mat into the outside world. You're learning to be more mindful of when you need to take a deep breath. You're being mindful of when you need to eat better, and you're starting to listening to what your body needs, what your mind needs, and you're going in. And you're not blaming the outside world for your struggles, right? Because you're starting to realize you control your destiny. You control how you feel. It's all in your hands, right?
That's probably, and we'll finish off. And that's
Yes.
probably the great what you just said. Then was, I don't know how if you can say anything any better than that. But yes, we do control our destiny. We do write on the wallpaper of our life. So Michelle, to finish off and with this, just uh, can you leave our listeners with just one tidbit, one nugget of advice that they can use right now to make their lives better?
Absolutely. Don't wait. Don't wait like I did for years and years and years. It's okay to not feel good for a day or two. It's okay to feel anxiety if you have something that happens and you feel anxiety for a day or so, right? But when it starts to go into weeks, months, and even years, like it happened to me, you know that you can't help it yourself. You have to reach out to a friend, a family member, a doctor, someone, a professional that can help you. You're not meant to struggle. That's not your true nature. Your true nature is happiness and well-being. You need to align with that. So don't let yourself struggle. I'm reminded of a quote, Gary. Pain is inevitable, but suffering is a choice. So I'd like to say to everyone, if you are struggling, if you are suffering, get your life back and reach out to someone and start to create your destiny.
Michelle,
Your true nature is not struggle.
I'll follow that with one other thing, and we leave it at this. Um, the best time to do something was yesterday.
Yeah.
The second best time is today.
Yes, absolutely. Do things while they are small. Don't wait until it's too big.
Michelle, thanks very much. It's been eye opening, and again, everybody, this is part one of part two, and this takes you back to where Michelle decided that she didn't want to live a life full of anxiety anymore, and she did something about it. And next week, we're going to see exactly what Michelle does, and she'll get into great detail uh, about her tree experience and all of the great things that happened to her. Michelle, thanks very much, and thanks for being part of this project. And I'm sure you'll have lots more to contribute as we get further into this.
Absolutely. Thank you, Gary, for your time. It was a pleasure.